Good evening, everybody. Welcome to most probably the last inspiration session of the year. Um, it's on digital twins. Um, Not really directly a run that we're doing at the Maritime campus, but it is an enablement to a lot of other um, innovations that need to happen. And I think there's a lot of uh, opportunity space in various levels in maritime for digital twins. And what we're trying to do here is to bring, to show some of these opportunities and some of these levels and what the business sense or what the opportunities there are. My name is Deepak. Most of you know me. If you don't know me, well, I work for MCA community and basically build the unlikely connections and try to create information parity to inspire innovation opportunity for the maritime space. 5 C's of MCA. Well, most of you guys know this already. Well, why do we do this? Well, it's the C, everything related to waterbound logistics and waterbound, let's say, blue economy wise. That's what we scope for. How do we work? We generally create coalitions. So we're looking at, I would say, the complex problems within the maritime that need to be solved and that cannot be solved by any individual player or often also not by the maritime sector on its own. And then you're looking at building these coalitions to actually get more people together, get expertise from other sectors together to build these solutions. The 3 tools that we use for that, one is a campus, which is a physical location. This is kind of like the precursor for such a campus. The idea is to bring maritime actors, technology actors, research, a lot of parties together and give them an interface so that if they find that they have a question, they can come here, talk to me and say, hey, how do crew records in the maritime work? And I can go up to the building, find a few people who are doing HR and say, okay, can somebody come and explain how crew records work so that the sector and its challenges become more transparent to people who may have a possible solution for that. So that explains the second tool, which is the community, which is building these unlikely bridges, connecting people up, and building complete coalitions. So if you want to do energy transition in the maritime, it would be pretty useful to have people from the energy and from the fuel sectors and the bunkering and the ports to join in on what the energy transition in the maritime needs to be. So that's my role. And then the third is basically, money makes the world go round. So if you have a brilliant idea, you found the right team of people and you want to do something, you still need to spend money. And, you can't go to a bakery and just say, hey, I have a good idea, just give me some bread. You need money. Same applies within maritime agreement. So those are the 3 tools that we use. Generally, before Romeo, we had another speaker from multi engineering. He could not come due to personal reasons. The idea with his presentation was to start looking at, I would say, a ship information system. So from a building perspective, from a shipbuilding perspective, can we create a digital twin of a physical ship so that when we need to retrofit these ships, or when we need to maintain these ships, or when we need to simulate these ships, that we have a virtual model to do this. But also that you could far more dynamically design ships. Or also, if you start looking at the or end of life of that project, to say, well, how can you reuse that ship as its components for something else? Or can you, instead of scrapping the ship, rebuild the ship with the components that you have? Well, I will still need to owe you that explanation. I hope somewhere we can still find a session where we can get Gert or Nico to come and explain that. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of like the macro level where you'd say, well, you do it for the whole ship. The second layer, which is what Sealution is coming to explain, is more, I would say, on the operational part of the ship. But I'll leave Romeo to do the presentation.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Romeo. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Sealution. And today I'm going to give you my insights into digital twins in the maritime industry. And I'm going to focus on the need of reliable sensor data, which in my opinion is the foundation for digital twins. And let me start with a myth. When you look up information on digital twins, you will often find a story about the engineers of NASA using a physical representation of the Apollo 13 shuttle. First of all, they used it to prepare the astronauts preparing for the mission. Secondly, they also used it while the Apollo 13 was going to the moon, and the astronauts were able to send minimal data to the Earth, and in that way, the engineers at Houston could reproduce the problems they had at the actual shuttle in their physical representation at Earth, and help the astronauts solving problems. And you find often that this was the first ever twin. Well, I'm going to tell you this is not at all the case. If we look at physical representations, humans have been using them for ages. For example, during Operation Overlord, in preparation of the Operation Overlord, D-Day in Normandy, the military used the shores of Scotland as a physical representation of the shores of Normandy to prepare for Operation Overlord. And if we look at architectural models, even though they're at scale, are also physical representation of something else to explain to other people, give other people insights in the actual building. Why am I telling you this? Well, because in my opinion, there is often a misinterpretation and misunderstanding of buzzwords such as digital twins, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. People, and especially in marketing, love to use these words, while in fact, they mean something completely different. In the case of digital twins, people will often talk about something which is in fact a digital model and not a digital twin. For a digital twin, you need an automatic data flow from the physical object to the digital object, and more importantly, also vice versa. If this is not the case, you're talking about a digital model or a digital shadow when you have the data from the physical object to the digital object, but not in the other way around. And I'm going back to the slide later in my presentation, and you'll see why. So now let's go to an explanation of a digital twin. I'm just going to read this. A digital twin mirrors a physical asset and its environment using a virtual representation continuously updated by sensors, providing real-world data in real time. And like I said, I'm going to focus on the data part, so continuously updated by sensors in real time. And when I think about this in the maritime sector, I immediately think about stuff like autonomous ships, new builds, a lot of the new interesting things that are coming in the maritime sector. And indeed, a lot of the research going on digital twins is focusing on these kind of things. But I'm not going to focus on this today. Why? Because the IMO envisions a decreased carbon intensity of 40% by 2030 and of 70% by 2050. Next to that, on average, 2.7 million US dollar is spent each year per vessel. And if we look at the average vessel, here you see the age distribution of the world merchant fleet. The average age of a vessel is 20 years old. So if we only focus on these new things, new builds, autonomous ships, we won't get there. We won't get to the 40% in 2030. There is a lot of money invested in these older ships to maintain them and to repair them. So I think we should also focus on these kind of things. So let's go back and check what we need to use digital twins also for these older vessels. We need continuously update them to be continuously updated by sensor in real time. Well, the good thing is, because the ship-to-shore connectivity is improving rapidly, real-time data from the vessel to the shore is becoming a reality. The price of this is decreasing rapidly, so it makes sense to send data from the ship to the shore where it can be used in the cloud for data analysis. Next to that, a lot of companies such as Kongsberg Digital, StormGeo, Hyundai are focusing on data acquisition platforms on the bridge, where they try to bring all data together in one platform. Location, direction, speed, VDR data, and other kind of data, instead of it being in different applications on the bridge, they bring it together. And with the ship-to-shore connection that is now available, this data can be sent to the shore, to the cloud, where it can be used again for data analysis. But sometimes there are sensors missing on the vessels, or there are sensors, but the data from those sensors is not sent to the bridge. And it's very difficult in the maritime industry to solve this, because the steel walls of the ships block systems, wireless protocols such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and LoRa. So it's very difficult to use these kind of protocols in the maritime industry. In other industries, there is a lot of focus on these wireless protocols to install new sensors. But like I said, in the maritime industry, it's very difficult to do so. Another way you can solve this is by installing new cables throughout your ship. The problem with that is that it's very expensive to do so, and it's also cumbersome. It's an administrative hell to do this. Well, with Sealution, we have found a solution for that, but I'm not going to talk to you about that. That's not my intention of this meeting. But I'm just going to tell you, we are using what already exists within the vessel. We're not trying to do anything fancy with a buzzword, with AI, machine learning. No, we are using what is already on the vessel, what is reliable to get the data from below deck to the bridge. I'm going to tell another story about misunderstanding of buzzwords. Often when we talk to shipping companies. They ask us if our connectivity system can handle high frequency data. And when I think as an engineer of high frequency data, I think of something like this. With thousands and thousands of data points per second for one sensor. But that's not really possible for the moment with our system. So we asked them the question back, okay, but what do you mean with high frequency data? The answer we get is, well, if we have a flow meter that today the crew checks 4 times a day, and now we can get this data every 10 minutes, or even every minute, that's for us high frequency data. But in fact, that's not high frequency data. I don't mean that flow meter getting data every minute is not good. Not at all, but that's just not high frequency data. Okay, now let's imagine we have everything we need. We have the ship-to-shore connection, we have the data acquisition platforms, and let's imagine we also have a solution for the below-deck connectivity. My question is, do we really need digital twins to solve the issues? Well, I'm going back to the slide like I promised. For a digital twin, you need automatic data flow from the physical object to the digital one. And that's what we actually want. With the ship-to-shore connection, we can send data 24/7, real-time, to the cloud where it can be used for data analysis. But do we want to have data also automatically from the digital object back to the physical object with no human interaction? Well, I don't think so. And that's not a problem. It's just a matter of using the correct term, which in my opinion should be a digital model or a digital shadow. I'm going to end this presentation with saying, I believe that some of these buzzwords like AI, machine learning, and digital twins will change our world and will also have a huge impact on the maritime industry. I just think we also need to focus on the foundation, which in my opinion is sensor data. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Romeo. So that was, I would say, on the operational digital model. More, yeah. Now, from a totally different perspective, we've all looked at a digital twin for the ship. We've looked at a digital twin to operate the machinery in a very effective manner. There's also another resource on that ship, not just the ship, not just the equipment, but also the people on that ship itself. I think there's a very interesting opportunity there. And I would like to invite Kim to enlighten us on the opportunities in digital twins for health.
Thank you. First, a sanity check. All right. Good morning. Good afternoon. And sorry, first of all, for the delay in arriving here. I should have taken a vessel instead of a car. That would have been probably faster. Okay, I'm here to talk to you indeed from an entirely different perspective. I'll also give you a bit of information about my own background. I spent 7 years in academia working on natural language processing. So basically using machine learning or developing machine learning models for understanding human language. After that, I switched to the to USA, Antwerp University Hospital, where I spent 10 years as an IT project manager, mostly dealing with AI and data intensive programs in healthcare, in clinical trials, for instance. And I also spent 2 years basically advising startups in a digital health pre-acceleration program. Currently, I am indeed the domain lead health for imec within the AI and data department, where we hope to show that AI is not just a buzzword, of course. I'm also still deeply involved in a hospital as a member of the board of directors. And on the side, I also run a small investment fund for health tech startups. Voilà. Maybe a quick word about imec too, because the more people I talk to, the more I realize how very different people see imec. So there's at one side, there's imec, the worldwide R&D hub that does cutting edge fundamental research in nano and digital technologies. So basically the semiconductor industry is developing years in advance the chips of the future with collaborations all over the globe. Most of that research is centered around Leuven, but also internationally. On the side, or not on the side, that's really the wrong way of putting it. We're also using that position to create impact for Flanders, to really be that innovation catalyst for Flanders, create local impact, but always with the potential, with an ambition to go global. And in that position, we're joining forces with companies and governments in specific domains. The domains that we're focusing on within our AI and data department is from logistics, supply chains, mobility, urban mobility and logistics, sustainable urban environments. We're doing lifelong learning, but also public health, and that's my domain. When I say my domain, what are we doing? It's just a quick browse. Let's say at the bottom, we try to keep an eye on, in Dutch we have a beautiful saying for that, vinger aan de pols, but I would not know how to say that in English. So we really try to keep close contact with the ecosystem, with all the stakeholders in there, to really learn what are the needs, what lives there, and how can we apply technology, how can we do digital transformation to help further these needs or tackle those needs. Some of that is about enabling structured registry at the source. Some of that is about really enabling health data reuse, because a lot of it is being collected. It's being reused in a very suboptimal way and really not enough. We're also trying to combine data from different sources and doing basically data spaces projects to see how we can really also move towards not only societal impact, but also, let's say, a data marketplace. And the last step is, for instance, diving into federated learning, where you keep all the data at the different sources, but generate a generalized model where the data stays where it is. So that's basically the high-level overview of what we are doing. I've been asked here to come and talk to you about digital twins in health and well-being. So that's what I will do, or at least sort of. It's also a bit of a myth-busting exercise, so we kind of have that in common. So when we talk about digital twins of a patient, let's say of a person, I like to talk about citizens and people and not about patients. Yes, at some point, all of us are patients and have been patients, but it's really about collecting as much as possible data that is about you. And that can be very diverse, because there's a lot of factors influencing your health and well-being, and also how that would evolve. So for digital twins, there are various scenarios and applications that have been considered, that are being, let's say, kept in front of us, like the carrot that we really want. That's about real-time monitoring. For instance, if you just had a knee replacement and you need rehabilitation, and you need to do that from home or from a specialized facility, maybe your physiotherapist or your surgeon or your doctor wants to know how you're doing. So we want near real-time or real-time monitoring of how you're doing. Maybe we want predictive analysis. Maybe we want to know if you have a kidney disease or starting to have a chronic kidney disease, how your kidney function is evolving and when or at what point it would evolve towards organ replacement therapy, let's say transplantation. We can also do simulations and modeling in digital twins, like what happens if we start this or that treatment. Can we build scenarios for that and try to model that? Or what would happen if this person would start exercising more? Would that affect his kidney function to the better or not? Yes. We don't need digital twins for that. And then, of course, personalized medicine, really finding the right drug combination, for instance, with minimal side effects, maximum effectiveness for people with rare diseases, for instance. You see, there's a lot of vision about where digital twins could lead us if they existed. You already hear the tendency of what I'm trying to say. They don't really exist yet. They're still kind of considered a future innovation, even by leading companies like Siemens Healthineers, for instance. They're still talking about this as a future innovation, and that is also what we see. We as imec have done digital twin projects, for instance, for flooding or for cities, where you take some sensor data and try to model how a flood would happen or at what point you would need to intervene. But we have nothing like that for health yet. Why? Because health is kind of a specific beast. We have, as I said, multiple factors that affect our health and well-being. It's not only about your DNA, not only about what you eat or whether you smoke or whether you have a family history of cardiac diseases or your socioeconomic status or whether you work on a vessel or in a classroom. All these kinds of things all make up your health. Well-being is even more complicated, I would say, because it boils down to how were you raised? What are the principles that your parents taught you? All these kinds of things. It's very complicated, which also means that de facto we can never ever capture all the factors that would affect our health. And that's kind of also the assumption that you try to capture as many factors as possible in your digital twin in order to model reality as close as possible. Also in healthcare, we have huge silos with historically very limited attention to data quality. When I started working at the hospital, I was first of all amazed by the amounts of data that the hospital had, of course, but also amazed at the poor quality. Some information is being collected 35 times. So, for instance, if you're a patient, need to undergo surgery, there was a patient representative who went to hospital with her daughter, and she had to give her daughter's name and date of birth, 34 times during that admission to the hospital. And everybody would go crazy, but and of course it's anecdotal, but it's also very telling about the state of healthcare. Well, not the state of healthcare, the state of data quality in healthcare. Because we're doing really good in taking care of patients, we're doing really badly in collecting that data once and reusing it all the time. And we're also doing badly in structuring that data. It's a PDF here, a fax there, maybe some patient is showing something on their smartphone and they say, oh, I'll make a screenshot and I'll send it to you, and then you just put it in my medical record. all of these things are scenarios, things that really happen. In the best situation, there's a PDF with tabular list of results, but it's very diverse, very variable how that data quality is. That also means that interoperability, allowing systems to communicate to each other, is also quite poor still in healthcare. We do a lot of effort of telling people to standardize their data and to come to agreements about the terminology that is being used or what the definition of a diabetic is. But there's as many opinions as there are physicians sometimes. And that really hampers interoperability. Sharing data is not self-evident, has two sides. There's a lot of protectionism almost, like, oh, this is my hospital, so my data. The physician will say, it's my patient, so it really is my data. The radiologist will say, well, that patient went through my machine and I wrote a report on that, so that's really my data. And government will then say, hey, wait a minute, I'm paying for all of this. So basically it's my data. So the my data, my insights is also still, it's human. And it's something that's very difficult to eradicate. So having people share data, sure, but what's in it for me? And that's a very normal reflex, but it's sometimes difficult to, we're doing all of this for the benefit of people. And having that compete with, confidentiality and I don't want to share is a difficult balance. The second side to that is, of course, the need for secure data sharing. Nobody wants their, I don't know, psychiatry or genetic data lying around and other people using it, or let's say insurance companies abusing that information to charge you a heavier bill. So really trying to define or giving the patient the control of how they share data and who they will share it with for what purpose is very important with such sensitive data. As is evidence, from the minute you are born or even before you are born, you're already collecting, sort of a medical history, the medical history that you get from your mother. And then as soon as you enter life, we could basically start collecting data and collect all of that in a longitudinal way, so that we have across your lifespan everything that has happened to you. Unfortunately, there's currently no real legal framework that enables that longitudinal data collection, because basically politicians change their minds every 6 or whatever years, or maybe every 5 months. Nevertheless, we see great opportunities when data can be shared. I've shown some examples previously, but for instance, we're doing a project in following up atrial fibrillation. So that's where your heartbeat is irregular. And we are doing a federated learning experiments across hospitals. Why are we doing that? Well, in the US, they were already doing that. The Mayo Clinic has thousands of patients, a lot of cardiac input data, so they can build a model. We're Flemish, we're Belgian. We don't have as many patients with that specific disease as the Mayo Clinic has. So we need to collaborate in order to be able to do the same or even improve the model. But then again, hospitals are also kind of each other's competitors. So we need to find a safe way to collaborate. So that's, for instance, something that we're doing in the Heartfelt project. And a specific one, it's also a very regulated sector. We have medical devices regulation, and now these days, software is also or can also be considered a medical device. So it's tied to all these sorts of rules and ways of documenting what you do and official ways of validating with clinical trials, etc. So there's a whole apparatus of regulatory work that needs to be done as well. And then there's the new AHDS regulation, about which I will tell you more. I was wondering whether that's something you recognize, because I can think this kind of my assumptions with respect to the situation and the needs in the maritime industry, but it's a very narrow side and I have no experience in the maritime industry. So I would think that you also have data silos, that you also have varying data quality, that data comes from all different sides. Sometimes it's a Dropbox or an email or an image or paperwork, or you have attestations and stuff like that that flies in from everywhere. So different ways of data delivery. And I would think that if you want to manage the people, the people in the loop on a ship, that you also need cross-border access to health data, because you may have a German, yeah, how do you call it? Sailors? Sorry for my lack of knowledge on that. You may have a German sailor with a very good German medical record, but when you enter Antwerp, you may have this general practitioner in Antwerp who just gives them a piece of paper, and all of that needs to be collected and needs to be accessible also by the general practitioner in Germany when he gets back there. And I would think there's also a need for a break the glass principle in case of emergencies. I don't know if that's something that you know, that principle. I'll briefly explain anyway. In the hospital, in a typical hospital, there's a medical record, you have a treating physician, there's a nursing team around that, there's a radiologist that also has a relationship with the patient, and they can access the medical record, no problem. Everybody else needs to, who wants to get access, needs to give a reason. And that reason is being logged, can be audited, can be, for instance, if you have the king in your hospital, sometimes people will find the urge to start checking the medical records. All of that is being audited. So to make sure that there's no misuse. But the other side of it is that if a patient falls down in the corridor, that any clinician can also just access the medical records by breaking the glass. But that's really for emergency cases. So is that kind of the situation, how it is?
All customers, all sectors.
Okay, great. Sorry?
It's not great, but it's happening.
No, I know. And before you think that I started off complaining about the state of healthcare, it might seem that way. I think there's also a few good things to highlight as well. So how do we move forward? I will not go into this again, but I've added some projects here that we're doing. For instance, with Departement Zorg, so that's Flemish government, we're trying to support interoperability exchange. We're investigating intra-organizational maturity, so basically working on data quality, working on the principles of fair data within an organization to ensure that they are ready to start sharing data if they would want to. We're doing a data spaces project, and I've already told you about Heartfelt. And yeah, at the bottom, we're also really trying to understand what the ecosystem stakeholders are doing and need. So what I wanted to do next was kind of highlight some trends and technologies that we see. It's not only trends. The first one is, well, yeah, could call it a trend. The European Health Data Spaces regulation that is coming. And I positioned it here as really an enabler for cross-border data access. So the EHDS really formulates in a much stricter way than was already done explicitly the rights of each citizen, the right to immediate free of charge access to personal health data in a readable form that can also be shared. That is really an important one. The right to add electronic health records data yourself and just have it collected somewhere centrally. The right to have the health data corrected, because sometimes clinicians just write, I don't know, 10 and it had to be 100, or yeah, the medication that you take is not correct in your medical record, for instance. And also the right to share your health data, your personal health data, with a healthcare provider of your choice. So if you go abroad and there's an emergency and you're still lucid, then you can say, yes, I want this person to see my medical records. If you're not lucid anymore, that clinician could then break the glass. But also an obligation for data providers to give back personal data to people if they ask for it. That's also an important one, and not a self-evident one, because today that is not really possible. You could get a CD-ROM probably that nobody can still read, or an email with some personal health data, but it's definitely not in a shareable form and all of these kinds of things. So I hope you feel that there will be a lot of requirements coming also to the data providers, and a lot of, let's say, flexibility for the people. Also, healthcare workers need to get access to health data of a person in their care, irrespective of the EU country of residence or treatment, which was what I was saying before. There's a list of, there's a My Health at EU. So that's a platform for first line use of medical data that is being made now, constructed, developed in the framework of the EHDS, and that will contain all of this information. And the regulation itself is up and coming for 2024 somewhere. And at imec, we of course try to keep a close eye on this impact, on the impact of the EHDS for all the stakeholders that we're working with. For instance, for Departement Zorg, the Flemish government, this has quite some impacts, because every member state will have a health data access body that will also govern what is allowed in Belgium. Because you can do a European regulation, and then it comes down to implementing it in the member state. And then we have all these other legislations that will conflict. So somebody needs to, steer the ship in the right direction and say, okay, you can ignore this, ignore that, but that is still relevant in these and those cases. Next trend, we see data spaces as an enabler for societal impact on the one hand, and also the data economy or a data marketplace at the other end. It really ties to an EU vision towards a network of interconnected data spaces. And from what I read in the event today, and the event invitation today, it's also important for you that you're not just creating another island or another silo. It needs to interconnect. And that's also something that is the idea, at least in data spaces. Again, data spaces is still something that we at imec are developing components for. We're also aligning business people on shared use cases. So it's still a work in progress, and it will be for a few more years, but we're working on the way. And data spaces are really about setting up the highways between all the data points and all the data providers, and then allowing ecosystems to agree when data can be shared and in what way. They can say, okay, I'm okay with my I'll try to think of an example that ties to your world. I'm okay with the rederij, the ship owner knowing about the location of my ship. I'm not okay that my competitor knows where my ships are. Or if I work with my competitor in a specific project, then I'm okay when they're nearing close that they do know when I would be arriving because they need to take over. That's how you can regulate all of that data traffic, basically. Let me see if there's anything in here that I haven't already touched upon. Yeah, I think as is for any data intensive infrastructure or project, there's many different legislations to be taken into account. Data Governance Act is something of this year. The Data Act is something of this year. The AI Act is still up and coming. The EHDS is something for next year. There's still the GDPR to be taken into account. There's a Market Act as well that is involved. So it's a lot of legislative work as well. And to be clear, we're not doing this alone. We're working with CITIP of KU Leuven to really dive into those regulatory aspects. So at imec, so we're really working with Departement Zorg to establish a first health data space for Flanders. I say for Flanders because the idea is always to let's make it for Flanders and then we'll show the people at the federal government how it's done and then they will take it over and we'll do it for Wallonia as well. And then we will connect with other data spaces in other domains or internationally. And we're also heavily involved in the Belgian Data Spaces Alliance. I lead with Cienzano a working group on health and well-being that is about shaping opportunities and also educating people about all the business, technical, but also legal challenges that are there in data spaces. And a third and last trend that I wanted to hint upon is personal data vaults. You've heard me talk a few times about giving back control to citizens because basically, we have so many stakeholders involved in collecting data, so many stakeholders collecting data about you. And at this point, we as citizens are waiting, requesting for them to open up their data, and the legal framework isn't there yet that really encourages them to do so. So let's turn it around and say, let's take control again. This is really something, so personal data vaults or PODs or solids, that's kind of all of the same, is really something that was pioneered by Flemish researchers like Ruben Verborg and Pieter Kolpaert. Pieter Kolpaert, who's also working, and both of them are working, collaborating with imec as well. It's really about, you managing with whom you share your data, for what purpose, manage your consent. I'm okay as long as I am on the ship, that my captain can check my medical records. As soon as I get off the ship, no more consent. That's possible, if that would be a sensible use case. Personal data vaults are really built on open and trusted web standards. And already today, there are several providers of data vaults, like Inrupt in Flanders, also Digita. At imec, we kind of balanced or brought together that expertise in Solid Lab Flanders that we're also doing with Agentschap Digitaal Vlaanderen, with Atomi, to kind of kickstart solid pods in Belgium also for health. But maybe that's not that is not the first use case because healthcare is a complex beast. Voila. So to conclude my talk, which probably took longer than I had anticipated, but you had the time, I hope. Some insights. Yeah, digital twins for health and well-being are a great ambition. I'm all for it. I see the full potential, but it's still an innovation for the future. We work on the basic enablers that tackle the big challenges in health and well-being, and also in health data use and reuse. We see several trends and technologies that enable cross-border data sharing, a data economy, and a societal impact, and more control by the citizen. And yeah, we're basically all for it. So if you have questions or want have ideas, I would be happy to hear about them. Voilà. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the two? Well, there are drinks and snacks outside, so you'll have plenty of time to actually go and approach the non-public questions. What is important for us, especially in the Crew health record part, is that we think there's an opportunity there, especially towards crew well-being, because crew is going to become a bottleneck resource in the maritime. So as we are handling our machines quite delicately and our ships quite delicately, maybe we also need to handle our crew a little bit more delicately or more friendly. One of the things is, for instance, the maritime industry has a significantly higher suicide rate than other industries. So in that, for instance, crew well-being and crew health records and being able to share well-being data of crew could be a very interesting opportunity. And then I think the European health data space regulation would offer a very interesting framework in which you could safely do that, both towards the crew members as well as towards the, I would say the crew management companies, the ship management companies, to be able to clearly define where that balance is. But again, what Kim told about data pods and regulation and data spaces could also apply to Romeo's business, because you could put ship data in a ship pod and ensure that all the access to that ship's data goes to all the relevant actors, but on a very fine-grained interface. So depending on who the ship owner is and who the charterer is and who the ship manager is, the ship data could be open for access to very specific players for a very specific time in a very specific, kind of, you could have break the glass, where if your ship all of a sudden ends up in international waters, parked against a windmill, then maybe somebody else will need to know exactly how that happened. And then you get a break the glass kind of scenario where somebody would come up and say, give me that pod. We need to check forensics on how this ship got there. So don't assume that what Kim said about health records, that the technology only applies to health records. There is a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of, let's say, take it from here, copy and paste it down somewhere else. And again, that's what we try to inspire in, give you those kind of connections and say, well, what can solid pods do for ship data? Who would be the pod providers? Who would be the objective party that would hold that ship data for you? Wait, that's not. But again, where does this end? And I mean, there's a lot of opportunities there. I'm very sad that we couldn't have Gert from Multi here as well, because I think on the shipbuilding model side of it as well, there's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of things changing and there's a lot of opportunities there, especially towards more modular shipbuilding and more. If you're building a ship today, you're guaranteed that you will need to retrofit or rebuild that ship by the end of its lifespan at least once. So you will need far better ship models, digital models, to be able to future-proof your ships. So digital twins are not just like, I would say, the hype word of the next 2 years and, you know, kind of, oh, everything you do needs to have a digital twin. There are actual, really, I'd say, business grounded cases to do this. Again, if you're triggered by any of this, if there are things where you say, well, yes, but who to do this with or where to get the expertise, again, you heard two experts, you know what their domains are. If you need more connections, you can always hit me up. Coordinates are there. I mean, you pretty much know me by now, most probably. But yeah, feel free. I mean, ask stupid questions or ask interesting questions, and you'll never know where that ends up. I mean, the people asking me, could you put a nuclear reactor on a ship? And yes, you can. So there are no stupid questions. Feel free. And now, drinks and food.